Thank you, Paul.
Sorry about that. So ProAmpac's data culture journey, that's our team. I encourage you to check out that video because Ron gives some a great background on what we hope to achieve in the long-term vision of ProAmpac in his in his video there. So that's great. Next slide. So we're going to go at a high level overview next. So business intelligence overview at ProAmpac. We've got a lot of different ERP platforms. Having grown by acquisition, we've got a multitude of different systems out there coming together. We've got Oracle, PeopleSoft, SAP, IBM iSeries, Infor, Macola, you name it. There are some systems I'd never heard of that are out there in the wings. This is only a smattering of the kind of systems that are available around ProAmpac, and we are trying to bring together and mesh across the company. The audience will be mostly those people that can do either some data analysis or really get some actionable insights going. So out of the 4,000 to 5,000 employees overall at the manufacturing level, we expect that we have right now an audience of around 500 to 600, but we've seen growth when we get to showing a bit of how we've grown. So maybe this will continue to expand to where really the audience is everybody at the company getting some actionable insights, even if they're working in the manufacturing floor. So right now we have over 35 IT certified reporting models and data sets that are out there that compose our high level corporate and governed data models. And we have over 100 self-service reports. We'll get into how we encourage the idea of self-servicing out good data solutions outside of IT, and we call that self-service. There are 3 different levels of BI type reporting and data analysis at ProAmpac. We've got the top level, which is in the green circle, is really about our corporate reporting, the certified, really well governed, consolidated report that are meant to be used across all sites and all divisions at the company. The next level down is what we call line of business reporting. It's the layer that represents all of the reporting that's going to happen at these different ERP levels, transactional and day-to-day things, such as just what's shipping out of the plant or operational type reports that happen. That layer of reporting still exists heavily because of all the different systems around ProAmpac. So that's a recognized layer of reporting that is covered, and we can use some of the Power BI solutions at that layer to provide people better data. And then third, the widest expectation that is out there is what we like to call self-service reporting. And this is reports that people are creating for their own needs or for their departmental use, or the kinds of things that have existed in companies all over where there's mounds of Excel workbooks being built by different cost analysts, department areas, and they still have value at the company. That is self-service. So there's a wide base of self-service that happens, and we'll get into our culture how we try and guide that in a way that we can all work together better with the data. But that's why the base of that pyramid and self-service reporting is going to be really wide, and it's a big category because it's not just those things that we've put forth guidelines on how to do uh, Power BI with it, but it encompasses any kind of reporting need where people are kind of making their own thing, and that happens a lot at every company, especially still at ProAmpac. So the primary goal of our BI team is those creation of those top level reports in the green circle, really about finding and bringing data from all the sites together into corporate models that can be vetted and trusted and used as a better source of decision making truth at the executive level. And we are expanding that and having that single source of truth while also trying to encourage better data use across the company outside of that top level into the line of business and the self-service. So this is a bit about how complex some of our interests get. You can see on the left side here, there is a lot of different sources and sites. They represent divisions of the company that have their own systems, and even within particular systems, there's a pattern of many different sites and business processes for locations that are spread across the US and Canada, all coming together in the middle into some of our most centralized data models and conceptual ideas across sales, our bookings and backlog ordering history information, so we get a sense of that, procurement level and supply chain information on all our materials that happen in manufacturing, financials, one of the biggest areas that's bringing it all together. And you can see on the outside all of the different areas and divisions that are coming in. At the top, Power BI was our chosen tool to really get that to the surface level of all of our end users out there. And we'll dive into what that looks like a little more in the architecture area. But the idea is Power BI is how people think of business intelligence at ProAmpac as that top level, and we're bringing all the data in from all these other areas.
Question,
Now,
Paul?
sure.
Could you say a little bit about your evaluation that led to the choice of Power BI? I know that you're focused on trying to do some self-service, and there's some other tools that try to build themselves as a little bit easier for self-service, like Looker, for example.
Sure.
Just curious how you came to Power BI for self-service.
A lot of our journey was based upon having been a strong Microsoft shop already. We have been growing out the tooling for Microsoft Office 365 availability to everybody. Teams definitely took a huge jump and enablement across ProAmpac when COVID hit, and that led to the idea of tying best in with Microsoft as we moved out of data centers. As you can imagine, with all these acquisitions, in some cases we're acquiring companies that really have a need to retire their data centers and move up to the corporate level one, and there's a cloud first focus around ProAmpac in doing that. That starts with Azure. So as the data centers and various servers were all being migrated to Azure virtual machines, it made sense to continue on that relationship with Microsoft tooling to extend the Office 365 platform with Teams and Power BI, as well as move into Azure Synapse. So we investigated, we allow for the idea in our self-service world that there's going to be a bunch of tooling like Tableau. I think there's a couple people that I've heard use it. We also experience in a manufacturing environment in the engineering area, tools like Minitab or some other very statistical packages that'll come up. So it's just not to say that the only thing in use around ProAmpac is Power BI, but certainly we chose that based upon it tying well into the rest of our Office 365, Teams, and Azure environments. Does that answer the question?
Perfect, thank you.
So this is a simplification to have the Power BI really be that how people think in terms of what's available. Behind the scenes, Power BI is supported by Azure services at the back. So here's a diagram that kind of shows a typical kind of ingestion pattern where your source systems are being staged and then go to a centralized data warehouse. And then to be accessible by users, there's a whole set of Power BI tools for data flows, data sets, and then the actual dashboards they work with. So that's true in our case as well. We have all those source ERPs that are on the outside of this diagram that we talked about, 17 different ERP platforms. Azure Synapse is storing all that into an Azure data lake. So every day we need to refresh this, a couple of these multiple times a day. Azure Synapse is a tool that is providing both the migration movement and loading things into the lake, as well as then bridging the gap so that Power BI can focus on the actual reporting and bringing out data sets that could be used for self-service or advanced reporting, and Synapse is underneath that. So while Power BI shows up on a lot as we talk with our end users, it's because that's the thing that our audiences go mostly see is all the Power BI visual that are in front of them. Behind the scenes, there is Azure Synapse, and all the sources are being pulled from.
Paul, maybe you'll be getting into this. What are you doing for orchestration and transformation and workflow?
That is happening with Azure Synapse. So Azure Synapse has within it pipelines that are much like Azure Data Factory, if people have used that. And it is a replacement for SQL Server integration services type packages and orchestration. So Synapse provides the platform. It reaches back in, and we'll show on the next diagram kind of the architecture of the gateway. It reaches back into all these sources and pulls that information into our lake.
Why, in your opinion, would somebody have separate Azure Data Factory instance outside of Synapse for their orchestration, transformation, etc.?
At this point, we are right in the middle of that migration. So we are Azure Synapse newbies in a way. And we looked at Azure Data Factory during this process and found that Azure Synapse was going to and had, right as we were doing this in the last 8 months, built the things that were in Azure Data Factory. So for us, I think the answer is we didn't see a need for Azure Data Factory when we were going to use Azure Synapse pipelines and all the orchestration within there. We didn't see a need for an Azure Data Factory. As a platform as a service, Azure Data Factory can be spun up and spun down. You might have separate factories for other needs, but we were able to encapsulate all of our orchestration and data movement needs with Synapse pipelines and don't need an Azure Data Factory.
Did you look at Databricks for any of that?
We have a couple things that are looking at Databricks within the Synapse pipelines because the transformations necessary might need to use Databricks. Azure Synapse pipelines like Azure Data Factory we found are great for base level ELT, extract, load into the lake and transform later. But for truly advanced like transformational steps, we have some cases where we looked at Databricks, but we try to minimize the use of Databricks in many cases. We found in this journey and by talking to others that come to this meetup and future presentations, their past presentations, that you can rapidly go off the deep end if there's some compute and transform that you're not really anticipating well. So we keep a close eye on how much Databricks we want to use in case that's going to bite us in the end. Any other questions? I thought I had from Ramesh. Was your hand up? Did you type something?
Can you hear me?
Yep. Go ahead.
In the beginning of the journey, how did you go about a licensing issue so much per user per month, $10 per user per month versus, a flat everybody can use, anybody can.
We have a slide on that near the after this where we're talking about the financial considerations. It grew or kind of small, and as it grew, we can walk through how we evaluated Pro and then Premium Power BI. They'll be interesting.
Thank you.
Sure. So architecture. So this diagram is a little more details about architectural considerations. I stole this from other internal presentations we used to describe how we would architect this. So on the left side of this was the former state. At the time, it was our current state. And on the right side box is the migrated and almost complete state as we've gone through the last half of 2020 and expect to complete this out, could be completely out of the data center, completely in the cloud by the end of Q2 this year. So that's what you're seeing is what we moved from on the left to what we are almost completely at now on the right. And the green boxes are kind of the existing systems we've been using, SQL Server and a data warehouse. And now we are transitioning it over to Azure Services and Azure Synapse. And we have source ERPs like we saw, even more than is really represented here. Coming on in, we had a main production server capacity in SQL Server Enterprise. It was doing the orchestration of SSIS packages. It provided a Power BI gateway that allowed for Power BI service to come in and use the information that's on premise. The Power BI gateway server was here for self-service purposes. Power BI as a service is structured in such a way that you would want to have self-service people out in Power BI also using a gateway to talk to internal source and databases they have access to. So that was part of the architecture. We had an on-premise Power BI report server Power BI has the service that everybody majorly uses, but it also has the option of having a on-premise server that you could use for only on-premise purposes. And we have a few small cases of that for faster refreshes and things that are only on-premise need. And then the development server for all of our development work. The migrated state that we are just about done with involves kind of laying that out similarly for people to look at the source system ERPs. We didn't change any of that. We still have to deal with all those 17 ERP platforms. But Azure Synapse becomes the main tool to extract, load, and then transform that data into our data lake. So instead of SSIS packages on this side, it's Azure Synapse doing the heavy lifting. It's coming in, and now there's a lot of Azure services involved instead of one main SQL Server enterprise handling all this heavy lifting. Inside Azure services, you have some cases where we're calling SSIS packages. This is also kind of this gear area would represent all of the Azure pipelines, orchestration that are reaching in and running at certain daily events or multiple times a day and loading the data into the lake. The lake is represented in kind of this box of Azure services as another service. We had to set up an Azure data lake in order to place the data and have the data go there. We had an Azure SQL instance where data is then transformed and put into our standard data mart. So there's Azure SQL as a service up in the cloud. The Power BI gateway continues on through so that we have access to all 17 of those ERP platforms. And that runs now within an Azure virtual machine rather than an on-premise server. And with the Power BI report server, comes out of our data center and is an Azure virtual machine, but still allows us to have a technically on-premise inside the network version of Power BI for those things that we didn't hand over to the Power BI service in the cloud. Azure SQL being the main then single source of truth data mart area where the transformed data that's ready for building out reporting needs is stored. That's loaded using Azure Synapse. So Synapse is bringing it from source systems, and Synapse orchestration pipelines are bringing it out of the lake and into Azure SQL. There's a gateway. There's a Power BI gateway listed here as an Azure service. Down here, there's a separate Power BI gateway for those self-service arms, the ones that aren't inside IT, but that whole wide, we're allowing for use of Power BI service for anyone at the company that has had a little training and walks with us to reach back in and get their data. And then the main piece that everybody thinks is Power BI at ProImpact is Power BI. And we grew from small amounts of Power BI use to the point where it was worth investing in Power BI premium capacity. And we'll talk more about that on the slides where we kind of go into financial considerations. But the Power BI premium capacity allows for us to think in terms of what sizing it has. In this case, the base SKU level of P1 gets us 4 cores, 25 gig of RAM, and 100 terabytes of storage. And we've not even tapped 1/10 of that right now. So we're expecting that to grow, but we have plenty of room for growth. And then the development server used to be a thing to keep around in our data center. That's been replaced by an Azure virtual desktop that runs in the cloud, and all of our development happens there. So this was majorly an architectural change around getting out of the data center, and then in the process, redoing a bunch of our BI things to work with Azure services instead of SQL Server Enterprise as the main tool. The 3-person team, you met some of us, you met us, Steve, myself, and Jacob. And the thing that I want to stress is this journey of probably the past 8 months, as we started to realize we wanted to redo this and get out of the data center, really heavily relies on our ERP support teams with 17 ERPs and so much different data connectivity, sourcing. Do we use ODBC drivers in some cases? Is there a best practice around connecting to SAP? We really needed to tie in heavily to those ERP support teams to be able to figure out how to connect to them, get the data out, and bring it on in. Any questions, thoughts, Anything you want to drill into on this architecture? Have me explain a little better. Anything?
I just had a question. I've been over the last few years heavily into Azure Data Factory, and I know Azure Synapse, like you said, it seems like it's trying to integrate all of these data flows,
Yep.
From one end to the other. And I think maybe eventually Synapse is just going to kind of consume all these products. But I was just curious your experience with Azure Synapse for those workflows versus Azure Data Factory.
Azure Synapse was less mature, and there were things that came out in Azure Data Factory that Synapse didn't support as of only 6 months ago, for example. So Azure Data Factory is a more mature tool to do this extract, transform, and loading than Synapse. But we were impressed that with just in like near the end of the year, Microsoft released a lot of things that really improved Synapse. There are some gaps, I think, but nothing that impacts our world. And I think there's going to be real no functional difference in less than a year between Azure Data Factory and Synapse pipelines.
Yeah, it's interesting they couldn't just lift and shift it, but I'm sure there's some stuff on the back end you couldn't just do that.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
We did translate some. We had started building out some things in Azure Data Factory, and what's nice is those Azure Data Factory pipelines use the very exact same kind of code base. So in many cases, if we needed to, we could copy the code from an Azure Data Factory into a pipeline, create it there, and then retire the Azure Data Factory pipeline.
Very nice.
I noticed I don't see analysis services on here. So your model, I'm presuming, is in premium. Are you guys using the XMLA endpoint stuff?
We haven't done much with the XMLA endpoint stuff. What he's referencing, for those who aren't clear, is analysis services for the actual cube and dataset builds for that OLAP processing, that kind of thing that allows you to do pivot tables on whatever you want, is what analysis services was good at. What we've found is that ProMPAC or Power BI datasets have essentially a tabular, an analysis services tabular model in them. And for our needs and sizes, we don't need analysis services when we can use Power BI datasets. So Power BI datasets for us fills that gap. We haven't yet seen a need to really build out analysis services for that kind of having a cube and referencing things in the dataset. And the fact that the XMLA endpoint, which allows for talking to those cubes in an even more advanced way, is being enabled in the service. Personally, I think analysis services is on the way out, unless you've got super huge data sets or monstrous cube needs. For us, I don't see us moving beyond Power BI data sets for the foreseeable future. Does that answer the question?
It did, yeah, and I would agree that with what you're saying about analysis services, especially with the lower like per user pricing they have in premium now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really quite a trend that I'm seeing with the different user groups, especially the Power BI ones that Paul and I sit in on, the Milwaukee one. They're really leaning towards the data sets as well, and of the opinion that the analysis services is on its way out. I don't know, Turner, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I actually was doing a lot of research with Azure Analysis Services a few years ago, and you see the usage kind of die off, and I absolutely agree. Like, it is meant for those huge data sets from the semantic side of things, not only for like what its use case is becoming, but it can be pretty expensive for smaller stuff. So you might as well use it for those bigger data sets that no other like semantic model builder can really handle in a responsive fashion. So I agree.
That's good. And I'll speak for Jorge of Plexus, because he comes to our meetups and he's a big proponent of some of the Power BI meetups, but has a heavy already existing set of analysis services. And that is going to be very difficult to move. And the advantages to them are having already had it built out and it's on premise rather than in the cloud. They're avoiding any concerns they might have about relying on a cloud service or letting the data go outside their control. So analysis services would still, I think, have a market in those people that have really large data needs as well as on-premise tight control needs. With Power BI, at least providing a window into those analysis services cubes through the gateway.
Paul, I have another question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share the type of things that you've decided to keep internally on your Power BI server, or virtually internally when you move it to the cloud?
So the one is the only thing I think that's really technically still like an internal server is this, I don't know, where is it? The Power BI report server.
Mm-hmm.
All the others are services that run within Azure, be it Synapse, an Azure storage account, data lake, be it the Azure SQL. These are all services that don't exist in the data center and are pure services within Azure. The Power BI report server is a virtual machine that runs out in the cloud, but it is configured to be inside the network. And in that case, this Power BI report server handles about a small set of about 5 to 6 internal dashboarding needs, where it was near constant refresh every 5 minutes, as real time as possible. Power BI Premium allows for up to 48 refreshes a day, or you could write your own API to even cause more refreshes to happen. But by having premium capacity, you are licensed to have a Power BI report server that you could have on premise. And so we just moved that up into the cloud and let it run every 5-minute refreshes for all its dashboards.
Okay.
That answer the
Thank
question?
you. Yep.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right. Steve, anything you wanted to add that I missed?
No, I think you covered just about everything.
Okay.
Just to kind of note that we moved away from OLAP analysis services, into Power BI. So that was actually Power BI was a replacement for our SSAS solutions. Yeah.
Yeah, what wasn't on the diagram here, because it was starting to be retired even before we considered moving out of the data center, was we did have analysis services, multidimensional cube models, and we were already moving away into tabular models, and Power BI came along, and we just jumped on that bandwagon.
Did you do that migration, Paul?
Yeah, and Steve. Yeah, a lot of it was, I've had, let's see, maybe 6 years of analysis services overall, and multidimensional did some crazy stuff with it. I love tabular. It's so much easier to work with. So
Way easier. Yes.
like,
yeah.
I'm just, hey, Steve, I came on board. I'm like, Steve, can I do everything else we do now as tabular models? And Steve's like, sure. So I haven't touched a multidimensional model in 3 years. So.
Yeah, and you got to keep in mind that with the machine learning and AI technology, they're building that right into the model, so you can run on top of these models analytics on AI, especially if you have a lot of transactional data. So a lot of benefits to go to that in that direction. It handles quite a large data sets that we have. We have millions of records, and in the upcoming project we have, we're going to be capturing a lot of operational data. So I find this much more effective, and from an Azure Synapse, everything's in one place. So I find it much easier to work in because all the tools are in one place in Azure in that one interface. It's instead of having to go to SSIS and jump to other tools to kind of manage the ETL processes. It's just one place to go, and it works quite well. So I mean, it's a transition to get up to speed. It is a new technology, so but it's well worth moving in that direction.
All right. So next, strategy and data culture. Some of my favorite parts of this. So when we are working on our strategy and working on data culture building, to us, that is about getting the idea of the value of working with data for your decision making throughout the company, up through executive levels. That is the idea of a data-driven culture. So for us, we look at this broken down into the pyramid you're seeing here. Around the top level is our corporate models, highly governed. the ones that are used at the highest levels and cover the most critical statistics and need across the company. As you go down through this diagram, you're getting into things that are less about control and more about informational use to get it more freed up and get people thinking in terms of using their data. So next level down, below our data warehouse and things that underlie our corporate reports, is this line of business reporting we talked about. Thinking in terms of, even at the levels of all these different ERPs, thinking in terms of data and building people up to work with data for their decision making is an important piece, but it's less about the single source of truth. It's less about the governance that needs to happen at the highest levels. And then at the very bottom, wide variety of self-service happening. But when people are thinking in terms of data and coming together on data driving their decisions, that builds the data culture. And it's less about governance and more about enablement at that level on the self-service area, where there's user-created Power BI content happening. So to enable the top levels, the BI data reference architecture, we have a set of standardized models for the things we were talking about before, like our procurement and supply chain, our financials, sales, and those are all at the top level reference architecture that we refer people back to and use to answer questions around the highest level decisions. We have steering committee reviews, and we rely heavily on our business stakeholders outside of IT. It's very important to have strong owners on the business side for each of those areas. Strong financial stakeholder who will want to think in terms of data that are in the financial models, a strong sales stakeholder will think about the data that's in those sales models, a strong procurement and supply chain stakeholder to think about all of the raw material analysis happening in data in those areas.
Did you catch any resistance, or did you have any trouble engaging people in any of those areas from high enough level to make the
It's a journey.
difference?
I can't say that we have everybody we want, right? We've been doing it for 2.5, 3 years, and the goal is to keep it growing. So part of this is about nurturing all the levels, including continuing to get better and better stakeholders engaged. I wouldn't call it resistance as much as cultivation of awareness. There's a lot of cases at ProImpact formed from a lot of companies brought together. People are used to dealing with their own data and also dealing with no data because they've had systems that didn't really provide any. So they're comfortable making decisions without data. By providing more data for them and encouraging them to think that data-driven decisions are better than gut feels, we build out stakeholders that find that value proposition attractive. And we're still working to get more.
Hey, Paul, this is Travis. Real quick. So on this journey, did you find that you were leading the analytics version first, or did you kind of pair in the data governance and I'll say data maintenance types of activities as a parallel path item, or was that first before you went into the analytics too far? Just kind of curious how those two, were they one and the same, or did you kind of realize that it was like chicken before the egg? Hey, I need to get the analytics, so I got to focus on the data.
Well, I'd say, and Steve, feel free to jump in and correct me. I look at the journey as we needed to come with rapid examples of data that they hadn't seen and ways to look at it before we worried too much about the governance of that. It was about adoption first, with avoiding some of the pitfalls that we know as BI practitioners, but not to have super tight, you must have top-down governance and all of our business rules are decided before we start to provide some data solutions. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, was that kind of led by, hey, I need to show some value of this first, get some investment, really show the use cases, and then you can get the buy-in for the why data is important. Okay.
That's my experience. Steve was on this road alone a year before I joined the company. What would you say, Steve?
Yeah, that was the whole point, is to get the the reporting, the data in front of the users by prototyping and providing kind of examples of the data, plus getting utilization and adoption. You get to the point of trusted data, right? If you don't show the data, they're not going to trust it. And once they start seeing it, then they can, you want them to pick apart the data and say, what's wrong with this? We discovered that over time, they started pointing to the data, that's wrong. And they realized that it was coming from the source system. They were entering data wrong. It was true errors. So it takes time to get to that trusted kind of a source of truth from the actual users, because they depended on their local systems, their Excel, manipulations to their silo IT kind of acting. That's how it worked in the past, and so it takes time. I mean, you have to get them in front of the data. I think that was one of the
And there are two prongs. The next slide is really, if you look at the two-pronged approach, we want to recognize that we need good data culture at the highest level, some strongly governed good data that we can make strong business decisions with. But the other prong is on the encouragement of data self-service to get that data culture thinking about data at all levels. And so we'll talk about that in the next slide. So
I got one more question, Paul.
Go ahead.
If if you were to ask your organization who owns the data, it's one of my favorite questions. Who would kind of raise their hand in your organization? Is it IT? Is it business? Or is it a separate channel, like a legal entity that ultimately owns the data from a legal and regulatory stance?
Sure. At the highest levels here, where we've said these are the corporate model for sales, but it doesn't have as wide an adoption. It's meant for that executive levels. We always link a strong business owner to that. We put their name right alongside the data models. All the reports reference them on the pages that say, who's the owner behind this? We want it to not be an IT person. We want to structure all of our data models with strong business owners that aren't IT. Now, as this goes down through the chart, line of business based reporting is really based on those ERP platforms and site levels and smaller companies that were absorbed and brought into ProImpact. You'll find a lot of line of business based reporting audience say, that's in that ERP. I don't own it. That's in that ERP. So you're going to find all levels of people feeling ownership, because you get farther down the chart and they're going to say, well, that's kind of that line of business stuff that's owned by IT. I don't feel any ownership of that. We do what PeopleSoft says, and the IT guys at the PeopleSoft guys tell us what data is supposed to look like.
Yeah, well, what we're battling a little bit on our side, if I can give a story, is and why I asked that question is, it seems like whenever we take it out of the source and bring it into the warehouse, suddenly it becomes a tagline like I stamped it with a seal of IT ownership, right? And it becomes like, well, IT moved the data, they should own it. And I'm just curious how you change that perspective to say, look, we're not owning it, we're taking it, we're ultimately working with it, setting some rules, some governance, but we don't own it. Yeah.
For us, the key was trying to never really communicate without it being with the voice, with my hand held with the business owner. So when we move a model, we're vetting it, and the business owner is approving, even if it's the person farther down that really knows what those data elements are. It's the business owner who is saying, yep, and the business owner is on the training videos. And if we do a rollout, we ask the business owner to roll it out to the audience. We don't send emails out saying, hey, there's a new model. And every model that we offer has that business owner's name on it. And I think that helps cement the idea that it's not an IT thing. It's hit or miss, but it's not 100%. There's plenty of people who would say, well, I just want to talk to IT. Like, IT should know all the data and all the systems.
Right. Yeah.
That's not true. So let's do what we can to include the business owner in all of the conversations.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks, Paul.
Sure.
Paul, this is Steve. Just a question around the governance here. With the corporate reports, are those typically done only by your team, or is it more of a collaborative effort?
Corporate reports are done only by our team.
Okay.
Though we will go on the next slide to talk about how we encourage through that self-service at all levels, the idea that we can certify up to the top levels of this, anything. So we have some examples of self-service going through the certification. We're going to talk about certified corporate data, that certified badge being earned by stuff that isn't written by the corporate team, and it makes its way up to the top of this pyramid.
Yeah, because that's something I'm seeing too, is more of a collaborative effort where if a business line, they might create a report, but IT just may have to be involved to certify it and make sure it's production ready.
Yeah, let me jump ahead to
Sure.
This was the corporate strategy slide. This was the guided self-service that's also part of the data culture building. So similarly, you see the same pyramid. Now we're focused on the bottom. We're really about that self-service reporting and how do we bubble data culture and make it even more useful. So the business users own the self-service reports they create. And we provide a lot of materials and guided walkthroughs, and we want to talk with them about Power BI and how great it is so they can be on a similar platform to us. And we do lunch and learns and things like that. I'll talk about in another slide. So guided self-service has less governance than corporate BI. We allow for that. We recognize this circle here kind of gives a good visual idea. The very center is all about tight governance, and that center circle is actually much smaller than the proportions on this chart. It's tight, small. There's not a lot in there that because we had to spend a lot of time making sure it was the right data. Then as you spread out, you're going to get people working with data and being subject matter experts for all kinds of data. And if we can encourage it in a self-service way, we can bring them closer and closer to the center and closer to the top by setting forth certification guidelines. So this certified badge here you're seeing with the self-service, we have a group that we'll talk about, data wranglers. We create an internal community, and we and the BI team kind of shepherd it. We encourage people to talk, and we put out a set of standards that all data has to meet, even ours, to be certified data that can be at the top levels and considered corporate based data models and at the center of this certified governance area. And then outside of trying to follow some self-service guidelines and being in data wranglers and working towards certification, we have everything else. And that's going to encompass all those people who are out there deciding not to talk with us and just build their own workbooks, or not really check whether Power BI is great and hear about it from us, but maybe they bought Tableau and they just started going with it. And that's going to exist. The best we can do is reach out to them when we know about them and say, hey, did you hear there's some advantages to joining our community and thinking in terms of a standard platform of Power BI. And some of them come over and some of them are still out there doing their own thing. Any questions on kind of the guided self-service idea, the value that the two-pronged approach is the second prong? Okay.
So the self-service users, do they get to use the same data that you guys are using for the top level?
If the data that they're looking for is at the top level, then yes, they can use the same data sets that we have at the corporate models and data reports to build a view that works for them of that data, because the data has been certified and the data set has been certified. But most often they are dealing with their own data that doesn't exist at these corporate levels, because there's a lot less data really up here at the less certified data. Someone will come along and be like, well, I want to understand what's happening with my press machine in Washington down to the level on what happened Tuesday. And I'm like, at our corporate level models, we don't analyze Tuesday. We analyze this quarter. So if you really, really want to do that, you're going to need to think in terms of self-service and dealing with gathering your own access to the data. What we've found is really nice about Power BI and Tableau and some of these tools that have come really matured in the last few years, they make it so easy for a non-IT person to connect and gather their data. Power BI can connect to hundreds of sources. Mostly everybody has their data in Excel. You can connect Power BI to 15 different workbooks across 15 different SharePoint sites and network folders and build your own understanding of that report and then publish it and work with it in the Power BI service the exact same as the BI team does. Then we start walking with you and saying, okay, to get certified, we need a few things. We need a little more documentation on what is in your model. We need you to have established how is this supported. Like, you are a golden person in your department and you made your own tool that everybody loves in the department, but who else can help you with that? Because it's not on IT to come and fix that for you. So who's your lieutenant? Who's your backup? Who's your go-to person in case you win the lottery and aren't in this department anymore? If you have good standards, you have a good backup, you have walked with us and vetted and followed some guidelines that we post on Power BI use, you can get the certified badge. And then you rise to the level of being offered alongside other certified models with your reports. The other factor is it needs to be broad in use across the company. We don't certify a report that's only going to be used by 2 people in Tallahassee. We certify reports that are going to have a wide use audience. Does that make sense?
Yep, thanks.
So to guide that guided self-service and to really help it along is our outside of all the development, building, and gathering data that we're doing, we help nurture this internal community. So we have that data wranglers internal group, which takes the form of an email list. We encourage people to put notes to each other or connect on ideas on how they can do better visualizations, even if it's Excel. It's all about dealing with data. And then if you get more advanced, Power BI is available to the entire community. And we do regular webinars. We have an office hours type meeting once a month where we encourage members from the community to come on in and say where they're at. Often that's a Power BI question, but sometimes it can be Excel. And I wouldn't turn down questions on how to do something better in Minitab or Tableau. We have quarterly newsletters, though I think we're more like twice a year. If we had to be honest, our newsletters are a little slower. We were focused on trying to migrate over to Synapse, so we haven't had a newsletter in a bit. But the newsletters get the word out and are distributed widely internally to explain that there are self-service options and to encourage people to join that community. And then, here's the certification standards I was talking about. So to get certified, you have to have a clearly defined owner and sponsor. It can't just be some data that ends up not belonging to a person. Assigning it to a person's name helps it have staying power, gives that person credibility, and must be handed off if that person leaves. It needs to be corporate-wide or majority site-wide based information. We don't certify just at that level of departmental report. It must have an owner and developer backup support so that in case something happens, someone just doesn't go, well, IT must be able to fix this thing. Nope, you need to be certified, you need your own developer lieutenant backup. We have a set of guidelines on Power BI report development so that we don't get anything too crazy appearing in our environment. And we do a regular audit of that. So when something's certified, we want to set a timer. We'll review it again in a year, make certain that you still have a backup. Did anybody leave? Is that person still here? We don't want anything creeping in that it has 10 years later, it's still being used, but no one knows who made it or how it's supported anymore. And then we slap the certified badge on it, and we try and pump up the value of that certified badge by making it visible when it's on corporate, heavily used, highly regarded data models, and you can clearly see alongside other models that don't have a certified badge on them. And then we can start encouraging questions like, well, Bob has some data, but it's not certified. Well, let's talk about that. Should it be? What is he doing? Is he going to follow these standards? Then he can be certified. So, make sense? Any questions?
Paul, you might want to mention the catalog too. We have a BI portal, which is a catalog of all reports. Obviously, the certified reports are at the top, and we promote that. So it's the place
that falls in that kind of corporate data where we've got our reference architecture and our catalog of data that's available at the highest levels. Yep. Okay.
Paul, with your certified data sources, have you and 17 different sources, have you found that you've needed to get kind of serious about how do you make sure those sources haven't changed in a way that makes your data questionable in these certified sources?
The hardest part isn't in worrying about whether things change over time. It's the business processes can be very different. The systems of what they record can be very different. But luckily, we are in an environment of manufacturing where the systems don't change that quickly either. So we are dealing with some source ERPs that have been in the company or the company that got acquired for 20 years. So change is not as big a worry for us as the time it takes to just kind of bring it together, deal with process differences and connectivity issues with ERPs. I imagine change will strike us once in a while, but based upon my experience at manufacturing companies previous to ProMPAC, change of these IT ERP systems is not quick. So we'll deal with the change, I think, as it comes. Is that fair, Steve?
It's fair. Yeah.
In terms of data governance, have you thought of looking at some tools kind of like Azure Purview? I know that's super new, but
yes, actually,
okay.
we set up an Azure Purview instance and tested it out. In our case, we opted that we're not really. It's got a great tool set for scanning larger environments that have a well-established but large set of data models. Our set of data models is only numbered in the, it's under 100, and to point it at Purview to scan all data everywhere in the company, point it at 17 different ERPs to construct this huge, massive list would not be terribly valuable. Because often people aren't saying, I need to understand raw material information, and then want to be confronted with 17 different sources of raw material information in a catalog. So we looked at Purview and went, it's great. It'll scan and catalog and update and keep track of wherever data is happening out in the company. But we're going to have this big mass of 17 ERP systems worth of fields that no end user is really going to use.
Right. So. Okay.
So, measuring success and impact of what we've been doing on this journey. We have decided upon some key KPI measures that indicate success and growth. And the three main areas revolve around adoption. How well are these tools adopting, and is the adopting continue to grow? It's on utilization. Are all the reports that we're making and are made available being utilized? Or are things just hanging out there and pretty soon no one's using them after a bit? Utilization is important. And growth. So are we growing the amount of reports and data sets we've got available out there? So this is an actual screenshot of the kind of KPIs we report up to Ron, who I mentioned, our CIO earlier. Check out his video, because he latched onto these once we started to say, these are our standards. We're going to be beholden to report on how we're growing. And he likes them every month now. We can't get too far into the next month before we get up, make sure this is updated. And you can see when it comes to adoption, we measure by month whether we have active users, and we average it over 3 months to know that we are growing over time. We might have some months where it shrinks, but if we take it in a rolling 3 months, the past 3 months, we're always been growing over the last a year and more than a year. And we kind of basically set it based on that trend. We were doing generally 5 to 10% growth. So we put that as a baseline for ourselves, and we have outliers that happen when we release a very large, popular new data model and report. We can see an uptake across the audience. So they go, what's this? Oh, how can I use it? And then some stick around, but some drop off. But we've had consistent growth of adoption.
Paul, are you pulling this from the audit logs?
Yes, Power BI audit logs are great tool for collecting this kind of usage in the service. So Power BI has the ability to go to the unified audit log and extract that, which we're doing monthly. And then we made our own Power BI reports off of all the usage happening in the Power BI service. Then the utilization, this is about all the reports that we've got out there being used. So of the certified reports, account of how you can see how we've grown over the last few months in number of reports and data models available, and then confirming that in that monthly period, are they being hit on by somebody? Or do we have reports that are dying off? And if so, we should find out why and either completely kill them off or get them up to the point where they're useful to somebody again every month. And then growth, our goal on the 3-person team, we have a lot of requests. We can't do them all, but we committed that we should be able to do at least one a month. And we've been measuring that over the past year. We've blown away that target. We might have to challenge ourselves more with doing more per month and over the year. And we've had cases where big projects will complete all in 1 month, and we'll have 12 new data models like we see here. But that's what we commit to, just general growth. And we'll tweak that as we continue to grow. Down here, this is a overall. So this one isn't a good representation of what we behold ourselves, but this is all Power BI models, not just our certified ones. So you can see that once we get into the self-service and the things that aren't controlled by IT, but more what are people experimenting with, we're still at roughly half of all the things that people try to do with Power BI are being used, which is nice. Financial considerations. So this, Ramesh, this is going to get into your question of how we journey through the cost aspects of Power BI and considerations we went through. So for those who don't know, Power BI structures with and lots of different ways to buy it, but base level you kind of start with is Power BI Pro per user, $10 a month. And you then might grow enough to where you want that premium capacity. There are some features that you might like in premium that you don't get in Pro, but we didn't go into that so much as we built out Pro usage amongst us as the our IT developers, and then grew it to the amount of users that were looking at reports. They also needed a Pro license. That's how Power BI Pro is structured. You need a Pro license to view another Pro person's content. So even though the three of us on the BI team all had Pro licenses, everyone else needed a Pro license in order to see it, to share it with them. Once the critical mass is kind of reached, so premium being 5,000 a month, the quick math is that if you have 500 users, then you're basically at cost parity with premium, with Pro. So we tracked that as we grew over time. And as we approached 500, we realized there's a bunch of features. We can manage things better in premium. It's one capacity. All of our self-service users can take advantage of the premium along with us. And so we actually cut over somewhere around 400 users a little early because we were on a consistent trend, and we mapped that utilization and how many people were on the reports. If we go back up a couple steps, you can see it grew from, a couple hundred to 500, and we could see that trend line. So we moved to premium once we established that pattern. So it was based on user count. We recognize that before, our BI needs were about having an SQL Server Enterprise investment. This was about operational expenses. So we have a lot of Azure services that are charged monthly and based on how often we hit the services or how much data we process, as well as Power BI Pro licenses are all now subscriptions every month. So there's a operational expense consideration switch from capital investments. And cloud infrastructure was a big piece of this. It was well in line with our need to get out of the data center, to not be beholden to large amounts of hardware, and our comfort and our company's comfort level with not being in the business of maintaining hardware and data centers and everything else and getting things into the cloud. And Power BI Pro, it's worth noting, Power BI Pro is available to those self-service developers. So in that data wranglers culture where we're trying to encourage people to check out Power BI, they get interested, they show that they have some things they want to try, and we're real lenient from IT will cover the cost of that $10 per user for them to get in there and start playing around with Power BI, sharing it with others. And then we just keep an eye on, we've got about 27, I think, maybe 25 Power BI Pro licensed users in the company, and that's been growing at a rate of about 4 a year, one every quarter. And so that's some of the financial costs that we keep in mind. So we've got our premium now, but we do need to buy Pro licenses as we expand our self-service audience to the tune of $10 a person per month. Lessons learned. So in this process, things that were really important to kind of stress looking back, the executive and business ownership involvement is critical. We really need to not just note them and then reference their names once in a while. We need them to be involved, help us introduce the trainings, help us introduce the change, be the person that helps us with the announcement. Their name is right there on all of our data models, and make them much more involved, not just a background sponsor that you hear the name of once in a while. Upstream systems, and then those ERPs, do need to invest subject matter expert time. We with 17 ERP platforms are not experts in what it means to get data out of an SAP system and an Infor system and a Sightline system and all these things. So we do need to stress and thank our subject matter experts for all these ERPs, which in our environment involves some internal and some consulting, as we've got companies that had systems that never, or companies that we acquired never had an IT department. So we have a lot of vendor check-ins all the time for a lot of these ERPs. Getting ahead of the curve is important. So staying abreast and anticipating the data initiatives around the company, trying to get some sense of what's happening out there, being much more proactive about getting our foot in the door and talking to people, introducing, hey, can I come into your department and talk with you more about data and how you use it? So that we can anticipate that kind of thing and stay ahead of the curve, as tools like Power Platform, Power BI are changing and adding new features all the time. And we want to be able to get them in the hands of people outside of IT too, if it helps them. Provide quick wins. So it's all about that kind of rapid prototyping and adoption first, and governance comes along with, but we got to show some value or things drag on and die off. Deliver through a familiar environment that people are used to seeing. There's a lot of comfort level with Excel. Power BI can be very easily explained to someone who's an Excel expert, and use that based on what they're familiar with to really launch something like this with what worked for us for Power BI. Prototypes and proof of concepts that use data which they are already used to really bridge the gap. Often if we came in with something to show, look at this analysis that you've never done before on data that represents stuff of what you've done, they've never done it before, it really didn't resonate. So the proof of concepts need to look a bit like and work with data that they see every day, so they can be like, oh yeah, their sales were higher that month, and they can believe that their visualizations they're seeing are really adding value to them understanding and thinking in terms of their data. And there's a lot of time. Most of this time really isn't about Power BI, isn't about Power BI development. For us, it's about data consolidation. We've got 17 ERPs, and we've got a lot of data consolidate and figure out how it really matches together in ways that help our executives and leaders make decisions. We spend a lot of time on that, and then less time is really involved overall in throwing together a Power BI report. Power BI is a great quick tool to build stuff with. So for us, data consolidation is a lot of time. So there, we recap. We talked a bit about the team of us that did it. We did an overview, talked about the architecture, how we kind of build that strategy and data culture, encourage people, how we measured it, financial considerations and lessons learned. We had some great questions along the way, but this is the opportunity for any questions we missed, dive into some of those kinds of things. Don't leave yet, because we'll also phase into a informal get to know you. Everybody's got to get their webcams back on. People have been turning it off left and right. I see you out there. You're going to come back in a minute. So question and answer. Nick.
Yeah, so could you just dive into that BI portal for a second?
Sure. Let me actually, I think I have a window I could bring up for it. Our BI portal is a SharePoint site, and Power BI as a service has a great navigational interface, so you can find things you need out there. But we wanted to provide a landing spot consistent for everybody across the company about where is our business intelligence initiatives and data models. So this is our BI portal. This is the SharePoint site. It has on it offshoots for self-service and training and videos to help people get going. But the key is all of the data models that are certified, or some that aren't yet certified, across the company. So you can see where I was talking about the strong business owner is listed alongside all the models. We've got models here that relate to production statistics, capital expenditures, analysis of sales. Some of our biggest stuff is actually called like Sales Pulse, one of the most popular, checked every day by anybody who wants to understand sales. And we loved calling it the Pulse because they get a sense of that every day. And we have a strong business owner listed alongside. So any questions about the idea of what the goal of us having a portal is?
Well, that's something we've been playing around with, trying to figure out the best way to get people in, because that's everybody's first kind of reluctance is getting into that Power BI home page and just being completely overwhelmed.
Right. We've found that we didn't dump people directly into the Power BI service. We've had the portal back before we had Power BI, we just used the same portal front end and started making all of these start to point to Power BI reports. Now, over time, people who are much more comfortable with a service in the cloud in the browser like Power BI service, they probably stay in the service and they never leave because now they understand things like, oh, I just type in a search and, oh, here's the report I wanted, or I can favorite that inside the Power BI service. They may not come back to the portal. But the portal is our beginning point for anyone new to understand that. And self-service comes up a lot. So right here in the main link is we have self-service with all of the stuff I talked about listed as documents and helpful tips under that section. But yeah, we found the Power BI service could overwhelm. So.
Paul, we have a question here from Paul. So are you guys doing much with external data? Been playing with Power BI's ability to connect to web pages, files on the web, etc. Lots of government data out there. So just curious.
We haven't used much public data for our data analysis needs, but the ability, we connect Power BI to databases, SharePoint lists, things out of our data lake. So Power BI as a tool that can connect to anything that can be reached via the internet is well known by us, and we use it for that. But specifically around like public use data, be it geo data or weather data or census data, we haven't had a big need yet. There are a couple of use cases that Steve will bring to me and kick around. Like, you were like, oh, what if we could do something with location-based data related to our customers and tie that with data related to population sizes, but we haven't had strong use cases for public data yet.
What's this data stewardship? Click here to perform data stewardship.
Sure. So with so many different systems coming together, you can imagine that we have a lot of cases where data is technically the same thing, but it comes in so many different forms. For example, we get a customer of ProMPAC, but it may be named one way in one system and it may have a period after it's incorporated in another. So we get a ton of things that are technically the same, and we've got to do some master data management. We don't have a big, huge system around that. So we came up with a program, an area we call data stewardship, which is really a set of SharePoint lists and Excel spreadsheets to do the master data management. And we pull that back into our data warehouse to categorize all the customers together, products, things that are all we find different. And we encourage that to be done by the business, not by us. So we nominate data stewards, and we have maybe 15 to 20 of those out in the business who are not developing reports, but their job is to help us make this data clean, and they're our data stewards.
Mm-hmm. Good.
What's the level of expectations from those owners, and like, I guess, is there like an accountability thing that goes with that?
It varies. We try to be consistent in saying, like, become a business owner. We're going to put your name in front on everything. We'd like you to help us introduce new changes. We'd like to vet all major changes with you. If there's security on the model, because it's a highly sensitive model, say our financials, we'd like you to be involved with approving so that it's not IT providing approvals. And depending upon the business owner, they're very much in control or they're very much hands off. And we try to be consistent with our expectations from each of the business owners, but to be honest, it varies. I reinforce best we can when we do meetups or trainings to say thank you to our business owners and pull them in and expose them to congratulate them, as well as make the reality of their hopeful responsibility to the data culture building more apparent.
Another component we built into the our model, especially our sales model, is our role level security. we have a 4-level sales hierarchy. So that hierarchy, if I'm a manager, I can see all my reps underneath me. That's it. I can't see any other accounts across any other divisions or groups, so basically it's controlled that way. So it makes it easier to manage, right? So if they're in the hierarchy, we don't have to assign security. They have permission to just their accounts unless they need to override that at a business unit or divisional level. So it's quite powerful in Power BI to control those types of security. So that's part of our models as well.
All right.
Paul, but can you go back to your architecture diagram?
Yep.
That one, yeah. I noticed that you have Azure SQL on the right-hand side and not Synapse. Did you think that you did for that data service, that you did not have to have the ability to perhaps grow in an MPP situation? Are you doing more of that heavy lifting on the Azure Synapse side on the left side?
Possibly. I think what you're, let me restate, I know what you're asking. Basically, this diagram makes it look like Synapse is doing most of the heavy lifting from the sources and isn't really involved with the cleaning of the standardized data models in our data mart. Is that your question? Really, it's just a positional thing. Azure Synapse operates on both sides. It loads from our sources into our lake and other services, and then other Synapse pipelines clean and put it into our Azure SQL database. And then Power BI refers to things from the Azure SQL database.
What I was wondering more about is why you weren't running Azure Synapse for that purpose as well.
Oh, yeah, so maybe it's the question around why Azure SQL rather than Synapse has SQL pools and other database as a service things that spin up as needed. What I found with Azure Synapse, and we reviewed some of the built-in like SQL pools and more dynamic database entities that you can get inside Synapse, that we didn't have huge processing type needs. Azure Synapse is built to scale to monstrous needs, and we're really very small. So we could say, let's just place our stuff in a database that we're used to seeing, and all this other kind of spin up the capacity for 15, processes that need to handle 10 billion records in an hour, and that's done with SQL pools inside Synapse. We didn't see a value to that for us.
Okay.
Hey, Paul, the data wrangler concept is really pretty interesting. Can you dive a little deeper on that?
Sure.
What is a data wrangler? Are they a business person? Are they an IT person? How do you qualify who is a good one? Are you training them? Are you evaluating them in any way? Is it? Could you give me a little more on that?
I view it as kind of a spectrum. It's meant to be as open as possible, so anybody that has an interest in joining the group can join, and the discussions in there will vary to be very Power BI specific, or try and have some things in there that might just be, how do I do something better in Excel? And so it's open to anybody to join on in. They need to join. We don't just assign everybody in the company to be a data wrangler. We ask them to do a little bit of effort and join the group. And that takes the form of a basic email distribution list group that they can join, has some past history, and opens up the possibilities to them. Then certain people take that to the point of saying, yes, my journey is going to walk with you on Power BI in particular, because that's where we provide the most guidance. We don't provide a bunch of materials on how to be better at Tableau or how to be better at some other tools. We say if we're going to do even more, we have a whole bunch of Power BI guidelines and stuff off the portal. So we go back to the portal. There's a self-service section there that goes into some webinars, lunch and learn, other resources to help them get boned up with Power BI. And then once they've expressed that level of interest, they've asked us questions, or they clearly have looked at some of the videos and they've been playing with Power BI desktop. Then we have what we call data wrangler office hours for those power users, and those are fairly Power BI specific, monthly, and they ask questions and they demonstrate what they've used. and we will push to pick out of that community those that have started to make data models that could be widely used. And sometimes they're interested in certification, but right now we're in the beginning of this journey. More often we have to say, wouldn't you like to get that certified? Doesn't that certified badge sound cool? And they're like, what do you mean? I don't even know what you're talking about. Oh, well, certified is cool. Let me tell you about it. It's very cool. All we got to do is, you tell us more about what you made and show us that you have one other person that you work with that can fix this if you made it. And that culls the wheat from the chaff right there. Some people are just want to do their own thing and jump, not follow these standards. Some see the value of that certified badge and being widely distributed, and we put them in the newsletter, or they get that certified badge on the portal and they follow these standards. Does that explain it?
Yeah. Do you find that the level of adoption in a functional area or a business unit is a function of, I guess, the capability of data wranglers within that particular group? Not so much?
Not so much, but I think that's more in a function of ProAmpac being so many different companies that have come together in the last, few years. So when we say, is that the best customer service department over there? I don't think it's measured in their technical expertise or willingness to think in terms of data culture and their own data needs, because we have lots of operational, be it customer service or sales or finance, things that have to be done as they mature in the way that the tools they're used to. So I can't say that because data wranglers appear that they've become better. They have some case been more showcase because we get the word out. We've got some great data wranglers that say operate within a quality area, so they've got some great quality initiatives that happen at their site. And then we hear outside of IT, outside of the data wranglers, outside of the data culture, that on the continuous improvement section of the business, those areas where they're meeting monthly metrics and they're measuring things in a manufacturing way, that they get kudos for those visuals. So that may occasionally happen, but I can't say it happens in a way that I want to say data wranglers brings value to each department yet.
Okay, thank you.
Might be a good marketing technique, though.
So Paul,
that's what I'm wondering.
Yeah.
So Paul, do you award the badges? The program is within your company, or you got it from Microsoft? They do the similar thing.
The program is within our company. Power BI as a service platform supports this idea of certification.
Right.
So what the platform supports is saying that a select group has the authority to certify. So we took advantage of that feature and said the BI team has the authority to certify, and we hand out the certifications based upon meeting these standards.
So you took that stuff and you are implementing inside your corporation. Okay.
Yep.
Can you say a little bit more about the consolidation and also data cleansing challenges?
Well, let's see. I'll back up to maybe this one. The data cleansing and consolidation are our biggest challenges with 17 ERP platforms. Even if we have a similar platform, it may be used in a different way because it was two different companies, 10 years ago. That is one of our biggest challenges. We spend a lot of time figuring out how to clean that data and bring it together in a way that can be used for all of the people in the audience, and dealing with the change that invokes in that audience, because we're changing and hoping for them to use newer tools that aren't the same tools they were using a year ago. So that we spend a lot of time on that. It is very challenging.
One thing you should just take is that you should have for each model you develop is a data reference architecture that clearly defines, like a data dictionary, with those attributes that make up that model. That way, when you're, especially for us, we have to load it consistently. So we can't just load it into a data set. We load it into referring to a model or a set of tables. So that's key. You have to have that, and then you have to share the logic and the rules for each attribute within that model with the business and make sure they agree with that, right? Because you might have different rules for margins and for different attributes and calculations. Everybody has to be consistent, else it typically doesn't work. So it's very challenging to get to that point, but you got to have at least a reference architecture to get started, I think.
All right, Paul, I got one more for you.
All right.
So I mean, you guys are a small team. What is kind of the process when you get like a large enterprise level report request coming and you're going to put together that big sales dashboard? Like how do those responsibilities break out between the three of you? Like, what do you divvy up? Like, how do you guys keep that flow moving so that you're producing reports fast, but also moving on to the next project?
In most cases, each of us is kind of handling the need from start to finish. We don't have layers where some of us are only dealing with the ETL while others of us are only dealing with the visualizations. So often a particular project needs, say, this procurement one right here. That's our main data model. We're defining it out across the corporation, figuring it out. What needs to be in there. We need to pull it from sources. We need to ETL it, and we need to make the visuals. That was me. And what we do to coordinate that we're on the same page is we use a peer review process for the reporting and the data model, where we encourage feedback back and forth. So it's a lot of fun to give my boss feedback, but I got to tell you, on his data models. And I welcome a peer review and feedback on ours. It allows us to be on the same page around what we're building on is following the guidelines we say we are in Power BI. And where's the other, when it comes to, I think one of these slides was, the idea being that having that peer review helps coordinate, but we don't separate out duties into like ETL or data mart or that kind of thing yet. We do have specializations in areas. I mean, Steve knows, he's been here the longest. He knows most about many of the source systems. So often we may say, hey, Steve, what would you think of this query, or could you throw together the query against this source system, so that it can be done quickly? And we may break it up that way, but not as a matter of rule. Does that answer the question?
Are you guys specifically working on just Power BI and these data sets in like similar type projects, or is there other kind of initiatives?
Sorry, say that once again. I think I missed the beginning.
Are you guys specifically just working on these data projects, or are there other things that come across? You guys seem like Power Apps and
well, we've got requests, a lot of requests, and it was important. I guess I didn't cover it here, but to handle the fact that there's lots of requests and they can come from big initiatives as well as small things that we could probably quickly get done if we can just insert them. We do have a process of incoming work, and we break it up into queues so that the things that really need attention at the topmost levels of projects are shown to everybody as the first things we work on. And if we have time for other sponsored projects that might appear at a director level, at tweaks, we can do those. And now and then there's things at the bottom where people are kind of like, hey, I just want a report that looks like this, or I want to tweak to something that just for me. Those do end up on a low priority on the list, and we just try to be transparent and say, listen, stuff on the bottom is very going to be pushed out. It might even be quick, but we might not get to it. Did you know you can self-service this and you don't have to rely on us at all? Want to learn something about Power BI? And we've had a couple cases where that takes off because
is it just data projects though, or like you guys, are you just doing Power BI really?
Well, it's not just Power BI, right? We have the data stewardship. So some of our reports have embedded Power Apps that, are in there for some of the data stewardships. We use SharePoint lists. We use Excel integrations to kind of provide that. We even up the update in SQL. So one of our initiatives is to kind of go after some kind of master data management system so we can get that off our plate, right? Because we don't want to be changing and managing data. We want to hand that off to the business where we
that's
can.
one
So
of the
yeah.
projects I'm working on now. That's like what I was asking, because it's been taking a while setting all of that stuff up, so that they can actually actively maintain the data that they're supplying to their report.
Yep.
We're getting close to time here. We did have one last question, I think here, and then we can stick around, whoever wants to network. Paul, are all your data models within Power BI, or are you guys building the data models using another tool?
The data models are in Power BI. Pretty much without exception. We have maybe a few cases where something had to be kind of mapped out, and it really is more of maybe a data flow, or it was something that was a little older and it's a old multidimensional model. But yeah, everything's being done with Power BI data sets.
On your Azure SQL instance, do you have a Snowflake architecture at all there?
Do not.
You do it? Nope.
Nope.
Okay.
Just Azure SQL for actual database. No Snowflake. We looked at it a bit, but we didn't see that there was a big advantage given that we were doing all the other Azure and Microsoft tools. So it was easy to spin up. It didn't give anybody in our infrastructure side or our cloud services that we were going to pay for questions over yet another vendor into the mix. So
I meant to say Star instead of Snowflake. I don't really
okay.
believe in Snowflakes.
You're talking about Snowflake schemas versus Star schemas.
Yeah, schemas.
Okay. Schema-wise, there's a variation, but I would say the tendency is towards Star schemas, but it rapidly descends into Snowflake because we have a lot of different data to pull in.
Yeah. So. Okay. Okay. Well, we can stop the recording now, and then if you want to turn on your monitors and stick around and network.
Yeah, this is the time when you guys, nobody run out of here. This is the part we miss.